Hi, Chris Delion here of Home Team Game Dev, and today's going to be one of the videos in rotation about the self-command productivity technique, which is basically an audiobook, ebook around how to train yourself, simple as it sounds, to put something on a board and then do it. And where and how and why that becomes useful in terms of separating what we intend to do and why we intend to do it. And the different examples they talk about in the audio range from, it's often when you're new to something, you don't yet have comfort in a skill, but you at the same time know it's the right next step. You know the right next thing to do is maybe a little bit monotonous or isn't going to be immediately rewarding, and yet you need to get yourself to do it to get past that point of where it eventually becomes low enough friction, you want to do it, or it's more fun to do. It's kind of thing we're into with game developers all the time. Or if you're learning a new subject or trying something new. Today's going to be a different application of it, though. In particular, it's going to be about, sometimes it's not about, I need to keep doing a thing or I need to do something that takes a while. It can be something that doesn't even take that long to do, but is important all the same. Easy example of this, if I've received a scary looking letter from the IRS, the tax authorities or something, and I just need to open it and look in it, and I don't want to, and I want to hide from it. Maybe it's a bank statement, maybe it's a whatever. I have something in the mail I should look at, but I want to hide from the news. Simple thing we can write down on our board is, I read the letter by, put the time, 11:25 or something, give myself a little bit of a window to do it in, and again, it's about building up a habit so we'll actually do that. Today's application is a similar version of that, in which it's the importance of training ourselves to be able to say no to things as a favor to other people. And this can be counterintuitive because sometimes it feels like what we want and what everyone wants from us is to say yes to everything, to be available to doing all kinds of things. A lot of people in my generation and younger, and obviously people of all ages, but disproportionately it's becoming more and more common, are juggling lots of different things in parallel, whether it's school, whether it's work. Often we have like some volunteer organization stuff we do. We have some low paying work we do that we feel good about because it's contributing to society. We've got some kind of higher paying stuff that's a little closer to a day job in the range that we have to do because it's what's keeping the lights on, but we're kind of working in these other spaces. A lot of people have areas where they're developing, they're starting Twitch streaming, they're starting podcasting, they're starting game making, they're starting something else that might eventually grow out of an enrichment habit into potentially monetize somehow. It doesn't have to, but we get these challenges where any given piece of that can involve other people trying to add things to our schedule, trying to stick us in another meeting, trying to extend and grow our scope of what we'd agreed to do. And we owe it to them to maintain those boundaries and figure out how to say, no, I cannot. And that's precisely the kind of thing of like, if I know I should say no, then I can use the whiteboard technique to write down that I said no by a certain time. And as long as we've trained that habit into, as the audiobook covers, get ourselves into doing that, it becomes important to them, because think of it this way. Either we lack the discipline to do that, in which case, soon enough, other things begin encroaching on the time that we had set aside for that. So let's say I've got 5 organizations, causes, projects, things I'm involved with. This might actually be a low ball, but 5-ish. 3 starts asking me to do more than I'm really there to do. If I don't have the discipline to say no and to maintain that boundary, then when the other 4 ask the same thing, they're disproportionately going to be taking out of 3. And or you can also see where this goes, in which as they all grow, it's going to start grinding me down to the point that I can't deliver rationally with a good temperament the kind of results that any given one of the things that I've allocated my life and time and energy to get what I can deliver to them. We're of no use to our customers, to our colleagues, to our bosses, to our friends, to our students, if we're worn down, torn down, and bitter. Got to think long term about this stuff. Another way this comes up, speaking of that, is if it's a situation where you know that if you do say yes, and you've known yourself long enough, you've always lived with yourself, if you can tell this is a situation where if you say yes, you are eventually going to probably hold it against the other person. You're going to get resentful towards that role, towards that organization, towards that company. Then it becomes owing a favor to them to figure out how to say no, to be able to define the boundary as to can't do that. Now, obviously there can be challenges here, especially if there is money attached to a thing as to am I going to lose the job, etc. So sometimes what winds up happening is needing to be able to frame these arguments in a way that is not quite just a shutdown. Sometimes that's what you need. If it's clearly outside the boundary, then that can't be what I'm here to do. Sometimes, though, there is another option that I learned from actually EA manager many years ago. And that was that if someone higher up in the chain of authority asks you to do something, rather than saying no, try to find a way to articulate from your vantage point, because there's things you can see that they can't about what other time trade-offs and where your energy is going, about would you rather have A or B? Of what are the trade-offs we'd have to do? What is it going to push off the table if I do join this other meeting? Is this more important than that? And it puts them in control, but it also prevents you from overloading yourself. And often, provided you give them the information that you have, because again, every individual has different vantage points of what are the stressors coming to them, where is their time being allocated. When you pass that same information back to them, they may well come to the same conclusion that, actually, yeah, on second thought, no, you're right, stay on that, that's more important. And that can be a part of that process in navigating that difficult decision in a way that's not just saying no, but it's saying, would you rather have this than that? This comes up all the time in game development practices where the artist, the engineer, the designer, the producer, different people on the project have different vantage points and different trade-offs are going to be involved. And people constantly have ideas. This is the nature of a human being. We have ideas faster than it takes to build them. I mean, I can think of a lot of buildings in less time than it would take me to build the first few bricks of any of them. They're ideas. That's how ideas work. At some point, we have to find a way to manage those ideas coming up, and we do that by saying no. And again, the way we do that is, okay, well, if we do that, it'll have this implication on our release date. It'll have this implication on our budget. It'll have this implication on, we're going to have to remove these other features to maintain compatibility with this other thing. And that is where it becomes a favor to others to find a way, even though uncomfortable, even though we don't like doing it, even though we imagine people want to be happy in the moment from hearing a yes, to zoom out of it and realize we're doing them a favor in the good of the project, in the good of the company, in the good of the people we're serving, and so on, to be able to find a way to guard those boundaries, figure out what those are, figure out what is the time I can reasonably, responsibly, sustainably allocate to this part of my life. And if and when it isn't, and this is also a difficult thing, but if or when you find that there is it's just not going to work situation that arises, that is sometimes our signal that it is then time to try to figure out what is the replacement, right? What is, from either side, I have figured out, or you have figured out, or they have figured out that this is what they need is no longer in alignment with what you can offer in terms of at maybe the amount you're paid or the amount you're getting out of it or so on. Then it becomes a matter of trying to find, I think of it as inflating the life raft before the ship sinks, figuring out, okay, well then what is my next plan out of here? Because in the meantime, that's what I got to do. And we see this, I think I had a tweet about this the other day, but it was something where if you ever find yourself following an instruction from a boss just so they can see what a bad idea it was, because you know that this isn't where the energy, time, and stuff should be spent, but, well, they're the ones who are paying, so you got to do what they say. If you find yourself in that situation, that is, again, a time to start figuring out, sooner rather than later, updating that CV, poking around LinkedIn, figuring out, what else should I be doing? Because one of the things that otherwise happens if we don't find a way to define these boundaries for ourselves, for the organizations that we're in, is that we can wind up stuck in a situation where it's bad, but not so bad that it's urgent to escape. And that can almost be worse because that will drag out pretty much indefinitely as we kind of let it, as opposed to finding a way to maintain our standard, grow our standard, improve our standard over time, knowing our worth and so on. So at the end of the day, all comes back to a simple note about defending our time, our boundaries, learning to say no. And part of the why the whiteboard helps for this is that the whole idea is that it's a separation between when I thought about it, all things considered, when I was in manager mode as my own boss, which is part of why it helps for working from home or self-employed or, people working on their own side projects and so on. When I separate my thought process of what is the thing I should be doing with this time and how long of my day does it deserve, and I put it on the board, which can include accounting for the fact that this actually shouldn't take long. It shouldn't take me long to text back no. It shouldn't take me long to email back, I'm unable to do this at this time unless we make these trade-offs. You realize that it can be behind you before noon. And instead of it hovering over you like a cloud all day, you can have knocked it out. It can be behind you. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder the more you sit on those things. And the separation between when I write it down and I'm in manager or self-boss mode, and then when I'm in executing mode, when I'm just going to zombie autopilot, follow the instruction, because when I gave it my full attention of the overall schedule, trade-offs, other things, I decided, and I have to trust myself, that that was the thing to do, so I will now execute on it. And again, there's a separation of, well, the boss said to do this. But in this case, the boss is you. One other example of this that actually helped me remind me of it is actually a classic of business sales. This sounds corny, but is the style in the 40s for business books. How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Bettger. And he's got a point in here of telling a story about somebody who was in town and neglected to catch up with somebody else, and they were annoyed about it, and they were like, but you were in town, why didn't you catch up, and so on. And he was like, well, that time was booked and accounted for. He had planned out his week in a way he figured out exactly where the time and energy needed to be spent, and then he guarded that. And that is how we have to live in order to maintain a sense of control in our space, which, again, ultimately is a favor to everybody else that we're working with, serving, helping, and so on, and making sure that we are available at the level of energy, attitude that we need to have for them, and so on, in a way that doesn't grind us down to the point that we're of less use to them, or, of course, long-term, to ourselves and our families. That's it for the day. Thanks for tuning in. If you're curious more about the technique, the mindsets around it, the ways to kind of practice it, self-command.com. Check out the audiobook there. And, of course, it's got ebook versions as well if you prefer to read rather than listen. Thanks. See you another day.